the High Stakes Fantasy Network. I'm your host, Greg Ambrosius, and I'm joined today by a special friend. He is Charlie Wiegert, the founder of CDM Fantasy Sports and a fellow member of the FSTA Hall of Fame. Charlie, welcome to my little podcast.
Thanks, Greg. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you again for sure. So I know you're not a technical person, and we're a little late here because we had a little trouble getting going here, but who the hell helped you with the laptop and the camera and the microphone? I know you didn't do all this yourself.
No, John Bryson took care of it all for me, and we tried our best to try to get it all to work. And I'm telling you, I'm a little surprised it's working as well as it is. So.
I am too, because when I talked to you 10 minutes ago, it didn't sound this good, nor did you look this good, but it looks good right now. So, all right. So you started Diamond Challenge 31 years ago, but you've been retired like 3 or 4 years, I think. How's retirement these days?
Retirement's good. I've very active in the Masonic fraternity. It gives me something to do with my spare time. I'm actually the Deputy Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Ancient Free and Accepted Masons of the state of Missouri. And next year in September, I'll go in. I'll be the Grand Master. So it gives me something to do.
I always thought you were the Grand Poobah. That makes a lot of sense, you know? Okay, so we're going to talk about the Diamond Challenge and the salary cap games. I love history. I love talking about this, and you and I go way, way back. So, but let's talk about where you were, let's say 1990, before you got started in the fantasy sports industry. What the hell were you doing for a living?
Well, I was working for a chain of newspapers in the St. Louis area called the Suburban Journals. Now it seems kind of remarkable. We put out 880,000 papers a week every Wednesday. And that seems like a really big number compared to how it used to be. And competed with the Post-Dispatch here in St. Louis. I sold advertising for it and really enjoyed it. And that's kind of where I got my start in fantasy sports. A bunch of sports writers at the newspaper decided they were going to start a fantasy sports league in 1984, and they asked me if I wanted to play, and said sure. And they thought that they're going to womp this poor little advertising guy without any problem. And I wound up winning the league 3 years in a row at the very beginning. And it seemed like the strategy after that all came to how they were going to try to find a way to beat me, which didn't happen too much. I'm still in that same league to this day. And I won the league again last year. And I think in the 34 years of this league, I've won it 18 times. So I'm a little ahead of half. So it's good, and it's your standard 5x5 rotisserie scoring league, and we can keep a limited amount of keepers from the year before with giving them a raise in salary, but pretty much it's a redraft league, and I really enjoy it, and I think there's only 2 or 3 guys that are left in the league that have been in it the whole time. So
wow, yeah,
it's
excellent.
Fun. Yeah.
So how did you ever run into Carol and Brian Matthews then?
So so I started playing in '84, and I was in a couple leagues, and I like playing fantasy baseball, and I looked for other leagues, and I found a couple online ones that I was able to play, not online because of course there was no online back then, but I found some other leagues around the country that people were offering games. I played in some of those. I got some more local leagues. And it was a local league I got into with a bunch of aerospace engineers. A bunch of them that worked at the time was McDonnell Douglas here in St. Louis and Northrop out in California. And a mutual friend of ours, a guy named John Mudweiler, who used to visit a place called Happy Joe's Pizza Parlor. And the guy who owned that, Rick Simmons, was in one of my fantasy leagues, and we played a lot together. He convinced me me and Rick, the team together, to go in this aerospace league. And I never did really understand their algorithm for the scoring, but I understood players a lot better than I thought any of them did. And I thought I can hold my own pretty good. So we got in this league. I remember going to the first draft. I was up in some offices that you had to have a code to be able to get in. I guess some kind of government facility that Boeing was using, and we were using some kind of satellite to hook up with the guys out in California. I thought we were all going to wind up getting arrested by the end of the day. Somebody's going to walk in and say, "What are you guys doing in here?" And we held our draft. I found out real quick that the way their league worked is when you were buying players, it was real money. So if you wanted Ricky Henderson on your team and you're going to spend $1,200 for him, I mean, that's $1,200 out of your pocket to be able to have him. And so it became a kind of a fine line to figure out how you could get a really good team but not spend a whole lot of money, because you could spend more money and at the end wind up winning and come out behind because it costs you more to buy your team than what it was worth.
Yeah.
And there was always a couple of guys in the league who are always willing to do that, spend big money on guys. So it was mainly finding value with players. And I was in the league for like 3 or 4 years, held my own pretty good, ended up second and third 3 times, and always came out ahead on the money side of it, which was kind of the goal. And it was in that league that Brian Matthews was playing in. And so Brian approached me one year and said him and his wife were a little bored with things over at McDonnell Douglas, and they wanted to do something else, and they thought running a fantasy baseball on a national basis might be a fun thing to do. And did I have any ideas how to set up a game and do it? And I thought, yeah, it sounds like fun. It just takes my hobby to another level and everything. So that's the first year. It was Carroll's Fantasy Baseball Challenge. Yep. And that's where I came up with the idea for the salary cap leagues, of putting salaries on the players, and using the system that we did was basically 5x5 scoring. And we ran small ads inside of your publication and your magazines back then, and some of the other publications that were out there. And I think we had 255 people that signed up to play the first year in Carroll's. And we ran a midseason game and then ran a basketball game. And then by the time we were ready to start with it the next year, we had decided if this was going to be something big and we were going to do something with it, we needed to get a big sponsor to be able to do it. And the Sporting News was here in St. Louis, so we thought, well, let's approach them. And so it's kind of a strange quirk. I was at the Sporting News offices here in St. Louis to basically pick up a copy of the basketball magazine to see our ad inside of their basketball magazine. And as I'm sitting in the guy's ad rep's office waiting for him to bring a magazine by, a guy walks by that I knew named Gary Levy. And we were acquainted from having played softball against each other for about 10 years in the media league, which had all of the media companies in St. Louis. We played softball against each other, and Gary was a really good player. Played center field for the Sporting News, and over the course of 8-10 years, you get to know guys on other teams when you're playing softball and everything. So he stops by and says, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "Great," and asked what I was doing there, and I explained it to him. And I said, but what I really want to do is meet this guy named Topaz, who's your general manager, because I wanted to pitch him on our fantasy baseball games. And he says, "Well, that's my boss. I'll set up a meeting with you." And sure enough, about a week later, on a Tuesday morning at 7:30, we were meeting Topaz over at his office. And Brian and Carroll did a great job helping put together a presentation to be able to present to him and everything. And we went over the presentation, and he was kind of half-heartedly paying attention and everything. And when we got to the final page and so that we projected the Sporting News's royalties off it was going to be $1 million a year, he said, "Okay, well, let's get a cup of coffee and go through this again." And so that's what we did. And he said, "Okay, well, it sounds good to me." And he says, "But I'm going to want fantasy games in 4 sports, baseball, football, basketball, and hockey, because we have all 4 of those sports magazines." And we said, "No problem." so we had to come up with games, and we had to really rush to get them done. I think we had like maybe 4 weeks to get all the rules and everything in for their first magazine, and then we had to turn around and put a football game together, which none of us really had thought about a whole lot. And so we just kind of copied what we did for Diamond Challenge as far as scoring categories and player salaries and things like that, and came up with games, and all worked pretty well. And I remember we were working out of Brian and Carroll's office, out of their house, and we bought a copy machine and stuck it in their basement so we could print reports and mail them out. And I go by this post office in Florissant about every other day or so to see how many entries were coming in late March, the first year in '92. And I go over to the post office box and put the key in, open the key, and there'd be 10, 12 entries inside there. I pull them out and all that. I wander in there one day in late March, opened up the mailbox, and there's a little yellow card in there that says, "Come to the front counter."
Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, if there was ever a point in my life when I was extremely nervous and was really worried about what might be coming here, that was the moment. Because back then, if you remember, we weren't really sure if fantasy sports were gambling or not, you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
so here's all these entries showing up in the mail with all kinds of money inside the envelopes. And so I walk up to the counter kind of sheepishly, to hand the guy the yellow card, thinking that I'm going to look around the corner and watch for some police guys to come after me and all that. And the post guy says, "Oh, yeah." He says, "Oh, you got way too much mail. We can't fit it in your box. So we put it in a thing. Let me get it for you." So he goes back in the back, comes back out with those great big white things, and he had about 700-800 entries inside of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's when that was kind of the defining moment when we knew this was going to go.
Yeah.
And we wound up with a little over 4,000 entries in that first game, and everything just took off from there. It was like a dream come true.
Yeah. So you actually invented the salary cap format in fantasy sports, right?
Right?
Nobody
Yeah.
else had done that before.
Nobody else had done it before. We got copied by a couple people
Yeah.
afterwards,
Right. Real quickly.
as happens all the time. But yeah, it was kind of my little brainchild.
Yeah, pretty cool. So CBC distribution, that was on the lawsuit. Tell people what CBC distribution stood for, and then tell what CDM Fantasy Sports stood for.
Yeah, it was a CBC Distribution Marketing was an acronym for CDM Inc. And some people always thought it stood for Charlie, Brian, and Carol.
Yep.
Carol used to say it stood for Carol, Brian, and Charlie.
Yep.
And but the CDM just wound up being an acronym of CBC Distribution and Marketing Inc. And it was just no reason for it, just a name we came up with to file papers with the state and everything like that to get incorporated. So
I thought CBC was Carol, Brian, and Charlie.
no, it was Charlie, Brian, and Carol.
So how many years were you with the U.S. Sporting News then before you left?
Yeah, so our contract with the Sporting News was a 5-year contract.
Okay.
When we got into year 4 of it, we got approached by MSNBC. I don't know if you remember them from back there. And Gary Levy was working for us at the time, and he was the one who'd made the contacts. And they were very interested in having us run fantasy sports games for them. Mm-hmm. And our contract with the Sporting News is pretty explicit. It was for rotisserie-style fantasy sports games. Mm-hmm. So we came up with the idea that we could run games for MSNBC, and we'd make them point-style games.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did, and we made them point-style games. And Sport News didn't really like that, and they sued us, and came after us, and wasted a whole lot of money in court in New York and all that. And in the end, a lawyer said, you're going to win this case because the Sporting News has got the definition of what rotisserie is inside of all of their materials and everything. So you'll wind up winning this case, but it's going to cost you more to win the case than what legal fees are going to be. Yeah. So it'd be better to try to work out a settlement with you if you can. So we worked out a settlement with them, so it saved us a bunch of money, and it kind of maybe soured the relationship with them a little bit. And when we got to the end of the 5-year cycle, they wanted to raise the royalties of what we were paying them for operating the games. And at that time, we started having competition. You might remember other rotisserie-style games coming along at that time, and that idiot Jeff Thomas up in your area in Wisconsin was operating his buff nonsense. And so we had some people that were pecking at us and taking customers away and things like that. And we basically had to, get a little smart about our marketing. We lowered entry fees and raised prices and things like that. So the margins weren't nearly as good, and we couldn't afford to pay the Sporting News anymore. And so we told them, no, we can't do that. And they said, well, we're going to go find somebody else to run games for us. And they did. They hired some Fanatics only group, which turned out to be a disaster for them. And we went and talked to the people at USA Today and Sports Weekly, the Gannett Corporation, and they were very interested in taking over our games and putting their names on them. And so our games all became Gannett publication games, basically the Baseball Weekly and Sports Weekly titles. We carried on the name of the games and made it their challenges.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah. So, hey, how did you guarantee the prizes when you did a grand prize? Because this is a salary cap game, and transactions is a big part of your revenue.
Yeah.
how'd you come up with the grand prizes?
Yeah, well, the main volume of the revenue that we had that came in from the games really didn't come from the entry fee so much. It came from the transaction fees,
Right.
and it was the revenue from transaction fees that kind of ran it all. And so, in the beginning, we started out with a $10,000 grand prize, and after running for a couple of years and seeing how much money came in transaction revenue, we figured out how much we could raise the prizes, similar to what you do, and there was always that intangible of the transaction fees, but we were in safe ground the whole time. We were never anywhere close to not having enough revenue to come in to cover what prizes wind up being. And we divided things down into leagues, divisions, and overall. So we were playing prizes out, in 3 different areas, and everybody seemed to like the format of it, and probably paid out well over $50 million over the course of the years that we were operating all those games.
Yep. Awesome. Do you remember the first time we met? So it was in Las Vegas. James Serra did that trade conference, if you'll call it. It was kind of
Yeah,
a bust, but it was great when we all got together. You and I had talked for years on the phone and never met each other. Never met
right.
Emil Cadillac, never met Adam Kaplan, any of those guys. And we all got
Yeah,
together there at the Tropicana in August. It was like
yeah.
113 degrees or whatever. But that was cool when we first got to meet each other and say, hey, you know what? This industry has a chance to grow, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was fun, and they were trying to put on a conference to try to attract people to be able to come to it. They wanted to play fantasy sports and all that, and it was I'm sure they were a little disappointed with the amount of people that they had flow through there. We were all there and had our little booths and stuff like that. It gave us a whole lot of time to talk, and I think that's when we started talking about maybe we should form some kind of a trade association.
Right.
And the Sporting News had a little girl there named Shellhart. I can't remember her first name, but I'm sure you do. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. And we made her secretary, so she had to write all the minutes and all that kind of stuff. But
She was great.
but yeah, that was the beginnings of the Fantasy Sports Trade Association, deciding how we were going to try to establish some things to maybe protect ourselves as an industry. And again, it was the gambling issue back then that had us all kind of concerned, because you never know how things are going to turn. And so part of our reasoning for doing this was to be able to have some lobbyists in Washington and be able to talk with the leagues. The leagues at the time, hated us. They wanted nothing to do with us. And eventually the Players Association decided they liked us because they wanted us to pay them money to be able to use their player names, which we never really had to do, but we did. And so it was kind of out of that kind of grew the whole industry.
Yeah, definitely. So we met there in August, and we did say, let's get together. And Carl Foster, give him credit, he was the one who was kind of pushing we should have a trade association.
Yeah,
So we met in March. There were 10 of us that threw $500 in, and we said we were going to sponsor labor. I think it was in Tampa. And
yeah,
so we sponsored it, $5,000. We had a meeting, and we decided to call it the Fantasy Sports Players Association, because the number one issue really was game companies, taking the revenue and not paying out prizes. So we were trying to protect the players. But like you said, you were involved in lobbying, and so you needed a little help with that. There was a guy from Arizona, I can't remember that guy's name, but he was a legislator who was trying to make it illegal to play fantasy sports. And
yeah,
then, like you said, the leagues was another thing. So the Fantasy Sports Players Association was organized in March of 1998. We got $5,000, and somehow Carl spent like $9,500. We were bankrupt before the end of the conference, but we
yeah.
got it together. But again, that was a seminal point in our industry, right? When we got together, we formed an association, and we all decided we got to meet a couple times a year and get this into a really professional industry.
Yeah, it really did, and I'm not sure you ever got enough of the credit that you deserve for making everything work and putting everything together, and then you found a way to tie it in with some of the things that Krause was doing and card shows and stuff like that, which we couldn't afford to have those conferences on our own because we wouldn't have had enough people. So being able to tie in made it affordable for us to be able to do it, and we used to find a way to have some fun with it. I think we used to always have a little bit of golf going on at the same time when we were doing it, and those were fun years. I remember having fun with Scott Higgins and a lot of the boys, and Scott's gone now, unfortunately. But he deserved a lot of credit also. He kind of went on the line, got us the charter in California, and took care of a lot of the legal issues in the beginning and all that kind of stuff to help things out. We had a lot of people who really helped us a lot along the way to be able to get things going. Your buddy from over.
Scott was with EA Sports, and that was such a big company to be in the fantasy space that they made us relevant right there, right?
They did. And your buddy from over at Stats Inc., whose name is slipping my mind.
My friend Steve Bird, come on,
Steve Bird. Steve Bird. How can I forget Steve Bird? He was very valuable in the very beginning and a very important part of it all. And again, he added some legitimacy to things because Stats Inc. was a very established company and providing stats for everybody, including the leagues and all that. And so having them involved, I think, made everybody take us maybe a little more seriously than they might not have taken us if we didn't have those people involved.
I totally agree with you. And Steve also was good with the players' associations
Yeah.
with stats. And so getting John Olshan to work with us and Clay Walker from football was very important. So
yeah,
it was great. Those early years of the trade association conferences were so much fun. We had Gil Brandt there. He would go golfing with us.
He was great. Yeah, I loved him. And I don't know if everybody ever gives him credit for being as smart as he's always been.
Oh, right.
But boy, whenever he told you about a player that was going to turn out to be the next best thing, man, he could nail every one of them. No wonder the Cowboys were so good. They had him around to help them with their scouting and figure out players. That guy was really sharp.
He knew that kid's high school, what town he was born in, all that kind of stuff. Gil is the best, and he was great to hang out with us. But the trade conferences were great. We had guest speakers of Tug McGraw, we had Raleigh Fingers, we had Harmon Killebrew. I mean, they were the good times. Okay, let's get back to your Diamond Challenge then. So what year did you go to USA Today?
It would have been 2008, 2009 is when we made the switch. We had a 5-year run with the Sporting News, and then switched over, and things were pretty seamless on our end. What the Sporting News found out, and what we knew was going to wind up happening, was the customers were very loyal to us. They were loyal to CDM Fantasy Sports, and they were loyal to the people who were running the games. And they realized that all the Sporting News involvement was just having their name on the game, but they had absolutely nothing to do with the operation of running it. And so for the first couple of years, they were our biggest competition because they put the games out there and they tried to get somebody to copy them and run them as good as they could. And the Fanatics Only guys just had all kinds of problems with it and trying to make things work. And, fantasy guys, if you can't get the stats to them on time and they can't make decisions and they can't make lineup changes, they give up on you really fast, And I think that was a lot of their problem was trying to do that. They try to use some phone automated system rather than being able to call in and talk to the commissioner and all that. So, thank goodness they tried all the stupid stuff they did so that our customers all stayed with us and continued playing our games. And I'm sure to this day there are guys that this will be their 32nd year playing Diamond Challenge. We've had a lot of loyal customers through the years that just continue to play the game, and it's a great form of entertainment for them. I used to spend a lot of time on the phone and talking to a lot of customers and things like that, and I think it's one of the most rewarding experiences of the whole history of everything is the time that we're able to spend with people, and Mike Siegel up in New York and other people, and they were very complimentary of us and very supportive of us, and they would do whatever they can to try to help us. And there were a couple points there where we weren't sure the game was going to be out there the next year, and when they were going through transitions on ownerships and all that, and they all hung in there and were loyal and waiting for us, and they wanted nothing more than for us to be able to offer the games for them. So. You're their hero now because you've taken them on and you're running the games for them, and so they can continue to play.
Well, we're trying. They still ask for Mary, though, so forget about me. They ask for Mary. They love the customer support that she would give them. Some of these older guys don't like the computer as much.
No, I know.
Yeah, they're kind of like you. But so the highest grand prize you got with them, I believe USA Today, was $50,000. Was it correct?
Yeah, $50,000 was the highest, and we were offering the $50,000 for both points and roto at the time. Oh, wow. So we had two $50,000 grand prizes out there. We never had anybody win both. no Lindy's
Yep.
on our end. So yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. So how many customers do you think was your peak? I mean, you talk about the days when you were like faxing over results to people,
Yeah.
fax machines were coming in and going out or whatever, right?
Yeah. And we peaked at a little over 16,500 customers one year in the Diamond Challenge,
Wow.
and it was a bit of a challenge for us, and we had to set up a separate mailing operation. So it was before the internet, so all those reports had to get out in the mail and
Yeah.
everything, and we had a machine that was called a Gestetner that we named after Brian's dad, and it would run off part of the reports and all that. We bought a couple Phillipsburg mailing machines, and our guys were really smart learning how to stack those things. So when they ran through there, everybody would get the right reports and all that. And I made more than one run from our offices, our mail center in West St. Louis County, downtown to the St. Louis post office, so we could get the reports on the dock before 12 o'clock, so they would get postmarked with that
Yeah.
Monday postmark date on side of it. And, we'd be running and taking them out of the car and running them up and putting them on the dock and all that kind of stuff.
Oh,
Because as long as you got them on the dock there at the post office before midnight, you got the Monday postmark on it. And the guys really paid attention to that. And
yeah.
if their mail wind up, because mail system in the U.S. never
Yeah.
was really the greatest. And so they were going out of here on Mondays, and guys need to have them by Thursday or Friday so they could be making decisions on
Yeah.
making changes to their team and all that. And when that mail showed up on Friday, if it didn't have the Monday postmark on it and they had something else, we were the first person they called. And you were late sending your mail out,
Yeah.
and then we'd fax them a report for free because it was our fault. But there were very few times that we didn't
Yeah.
get them postmarked on that Monday.
The internet made things a lot easier for sure. It's
Yeah.
instantaneous, but we're old enough to have to live through when we had the fax machine and, of course, mailing out. So, what was the years? So, the first years with USA Today was 98, 99. You said 208 and 29, but I think it was 98, 99. What was the first year
Yeah.
you were licensed then by MLB? And how did that
Well,
come about?
yeah, when we were dealing with the sporting news, they decided that if we could get a license from the Major League Baseball Players Association, that it would make their life easier because of all their dealings they have with Major League Baseball and,
Right.
and the Players Association. And so it wasn't so much that we really felt like it was a needed thing and we had to have it to be able to do what we were doing. It was more for the convenience of having it. And a little bit, being able to stick their logo on the bottom of the ads and all that kind of stuff added credibility to what we were doing, and so in the beginning, the Players Association, they didn't want to talk to us, and they actually had a subsidiary guy. I want to say it was like Mike Schechter and Associates, and
Sure. Yeah.
so we wound up talking with this Mike Schechter and Associates and wound up getting a license from him,
Yeah.
which he represented the Major League Baseball Players Association. So it was their license, but their people didn't want to deal with. He did, So we got the license from him, and I think that was probably in our second year when we wound up having that license and doing it, and it turned out to be something that wasn't overly expensive for us. We paid them a wholesale value, which wound up being 50% of the entry fee a guy would play on playing the game. And we paid him a percentage based on what that wound up being.
Yeah.
Never had to pay any royalties on transactions or anything like that. So, I don't think in the early days, I think it probably ran someplace between $5,000-6,000 and maybe $20,000 for that license fee. So it wasn't like it was something that was going to cause us not to be able to operate the games. It wasn't that expensive.
Yeah. Huh, interesting. And so you had it that whole time, and then what year was it when Bob Bowman turned you down for a license?
Yeah. So as it turned out, the Players Association decided they were going to eliminate Mike Schechter. So when they eliminated him, that's when I started dealing with Olshan at the Baseball Players Association. We had a pretty good relationship, and it was little things that used to aggravate him. I don't remember, but one year he came along and said, "You can't use Ryan Sandberg in your game because he's not a member of the Players Association." And one year, it's Barry Bonds. He's not going to sign a contract. He's going to be out of players, so you can't use him in your game. I said, "Look, I'm using him in my game. We're using him by his name. If you don't like it, take our license away. But I can't operate a game without having Barry Bonds inside.
Right.
So that's silly. So we had a little arguments over those things, but nothing really serious. And then it was, we were already with USA Today, and Gannett was prepared to buy us, and we'd gone all the way down the road, and we're crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and one of the last things that they were looking for was a renewed contract with the Major League Baseball Players Association. And so, I'm on the phone with Olsham trying to get this done and everything. And I think it was like maybe 2004, 2005. And finally, he says to me, he says, well, I'm sorry it's taking so long, but I don't have the right to do that anymore. The Major League Baseball Players Association just sold their rights to Major League Baseball Advanced Media. And I said, well, who the heck are they? And he said, well, that's an organization that's made up 90% by the owners and 10% by some other people, Bob Bowman and some other people. So he says, you'll have to get your license from them. So I said, okay, and made the call to them and talked to one of their guys on the phone, and agreed to fly up to New York with our lawyer and be able to talk with them about getting this licensing. And before we could talk to them, we had to have them sign a disclosure statement because of our contract with Gannett. So we had a little bit of a hassle getting them to do that, and no sooner than the guy comes walking back into the office and throws the signed disclosure statement as on the table. He says, "Well, you think we're stupid? We know what you guys are doing. You're selling to Gannett." And I'm sitting there thinking, well, this is going to make them happy. They should be happy working with Gannett and all that kind of stuff. And he says, no. He says, we don't like Gannett. They run all of these great big sections inside of their newspapers promoting the All-Star Game and World Series, and they don't pay any royalties, and we don't get any money off of it at all. They're taking all this money from General Motors, and we don't get any of it. And so they didn't like Gannett any better than they did us. And so when we left there with the idea that he was going to call us the next day or two and tell us if he was going to give us a license. And 2 days later, he called back and said, no, we're not going to give you a license anymore. You guys are done. And for the next year, you can continue to operate the games, and we'll pay you a 15% royalty over your revenue, but all the rest of it is ours. And then after that, you're done. And so that's when we decided, well, okay, we need to do something here. And so we got a hold of Rudy Telscher and Harness Dickey and interviewed a couple lawyers in St. Louis. He was the one that made the most sense for us. And so we actually started the lawsuit by filing a declaratory action against them, mainly so we could continue to operate the games.
Right.
But the problem that it caused more than anything else is with Gannett. That made them very uneasy. It made the sale, put on hold and eventually gone. And they also didn't feel very comfortable with leaving their name on the games because now here's this lawsuit out there. So that's really when we started putting the CDM name on the games and started operating at this CDM's Diamond Challenge as opposed to Baseball Weeklies. And then that's kind of how that all got started.
Yeah, that was a shame. Do you think this was a Bob Bowman thing? I want to bring this up again just because people don't realize the league itself was trying to shut down the fantasy sports industry, to be truthful. Then
That's right.
Everybody would have to come to MLB.com to play a fantasy sports game. They were only going to license maybe one or two, maybe ESPN, maybe Yahoo, and then it would be MLB.com. People don't realize in 2004, 2005, this industry almost changed completely to a monopoly led by Major League Baseball. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're correct. That was no doubt their intention. I mean, they were going to take over all these games. They were going to run as much of it as they could. I think they said at the time that they were going to have maybe 6 people that they were going to give licenses to, and it was the big companies, the ESPNs, the Yahoos, the people who were operating big games at the time. CBS was operating games at the time, Sportsline. And those were the ones that they were going to give licenses to, and most of the small operators are all going to get shut down. And from their standpoint, what a nice game plan. I mean, you stop and think if they would have been successful, they would have controlled the whole industry and would have controlled everybody playing. Everybody would have had to go through them to be able to do it. And I remember I remember talking with Clay Walker about it afterwards because he was on the football side of things. But
Right.
basically, whatever was going to happen with baseball was going to happen with football and the Football Players Association. And he just kind of sat back and watched and didn't really have a whole lot to do with it. I remember we were up in New York for a business journal convention that they were having up there, and in the middle about when this was all going on, and they had a breakout session talking about the lawsuit at this conference that they had there, and at that point, I think Judge Medler had already ruled in our favor, and ruled that we didn't need to have a license for them to operate these games. We can use the players' names; they're in the public domain, and no, we didn't need to have it. And so Major League Baseball is getting ready to file their appeal. And at the time, there was an opportunity that they could have came to us and made us an offer to have Judge Medler vacate her decision. And what that would have meant is that even though the decision was there and that it kind of existed out there that guys could operate fantasy games and companies could operate fantasy games and not have to pay them royalties, but by vacating it, it gave them the opportunity that they could have gone to the larger companies, the ESPNs and the CBS Sports and charged them $1 million a year in royalties to be able to operate games, and those companies would have paid it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was, if you remember back in the time when we were trying to get them involved in the lawsuit and all that, they said, look, we can't do it because our relationships are so strong with them, not just for fantasy, but for everything else we do. We can't infringe upon losing that. And so I remember having that conversation, and I remember Judy Heater telling us that no, we're not going to ask the judge to vacate the order, and we're going to hire the best law firm we can to get this decision changed, because we're absolutely positive it was that she made the wrong decision, and they did. They went and hired a big outfit out of Washington, D.C. to handle their appeal and all that kind of stuff for it. But I remember we're in New York. Clay Walker was just adamant about how upset he was over this whole deal and how upset he was with Heater because, vacating the decision was the right thing for him and everybody else in the industry to do. Right. They didn't really like having to deal with all the little guys anyway, if they didn't want to. And all they really cared about was money and revenue and how much they could generate. And being able to collect it from the big guys would have been more than enough to keep them all happy and probably put $4 or $5 million there in their coffers every year and not have to aggravate themselves with anybody else. So if there's a culprit in the whole deal, if there's one person, when you go back and look in this whole deal, who's the person that was the biggest screw up and made the worst decision, it was Judy Heater.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Bowman deserves to be at the top and maybe Judy next. But what people don't realize is the league felt that statistics were parts of rights of publicity to the players. They owned the statistics that were out in the public domain. They're out in the public domain, right? Anybody could have them. And yet they felt they owned them. And so we needed to pay. I mean, I was paying $15,000 a year to each sport. Okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lot. And we just did it to stay in good graces with the players associations. As Charlie said, Clay Walker was with the NFL Players Association. They were getting millions of dollars a year in licensing. They didn't want to go over to zero. They didn't want to own the space, and they didn't want to go to zero. They wanted that middle part. But Bob Bowman pushed it. And so you guys won, but then it went to an appeal, a 3-person appellate court. Is that correct? And then they voted overwhelmingly in your favor.
Yeah, there was four different counts to that lawsuit, 4 different parts of it, along with rights of publicity and being just one of them, and First Amendment rights and things like that. And that 3-judge appellate court agreed with us on all 3 judges agreed with us on all 3 of the counts. And on one of the counts, one of the judges, one of the 3 said, well, maybe they might have something here on that part of it. But the other 2 didn't agree with it. So they wound up losing on every side of it. So it was a big deal. I actually remember going down to a television station here in St. Louis to be on ESPN, and I was on there with Bob Bowman. and my biggest fear was he was going to get a hold of St. Louis Cardinals and find out I had season tickets and say, take those tickets away from that guy. And as silly as it seems, that was actually part of our biggest scare at the time was that, it was a David and Goliath kind of situation. There's no doubt about it. and you're talking Major League Baseball, and you're talking about Supreme Court justices, and you're talking about attorney generals and people who have skyboxes in Washington to be able to go watch Washington National baseball games. And these people are friends with Major League Baseball and friends with the Washington Nationals. They had friends in high places.
Yep.
And, part of our fear is their friends in high places was going to be our biggest problem, because they were going to come up with a reason to dispute this thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we were the little guy for sure, but I mean, the entire industry rallied around. I mean, you guys paid for everything. You paid for the lawyers. We, as an industry, as a trade association, we did an amicus brief to say they're not the only ones affected. Hundreds of us are going to be affected by this, and I think that did help you guys. But bottom line is, you guys took $250,000 or whatever it is out of your pocket to pay the lawyers to win this, to really save the industry. I mean, I'm not overstating it, folks. This saved the industry from letting MLB control everything, to be truthful, in the baseball industry. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Glenn Colton writing a brief for us for the trade association, definitely helped. And we had a couple other briefs that got filed also, and those didn't help. And that did help the judge realize that this wasn't just about us and them, that there were a lot of people that were affected by it. And our legal fees wound up well over $1 million in the whole deal. So, and I kind of felt sorry for Rudy Telscher, our lawyer, in one respect, in that I think every judge's dream is to be able to argue a case before the United States Supreme Court, and so when it got appealed and it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, there had to be a side of Rudy that was thinking, I'm going to get this chance to argue a case before the United States Supreme Court. So when the Supreme Court came back and said, no, we're not going to hear it, that was great for us, because that ended it, and it's over now. And but I'm sure there was a side of Rudy that thought that would have been fun. But if they did decide to hear it, that would have meant there was a chance that it could have gotten reversed and overturned and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And if they would have heard it, they would have cost us a whole lot more money, as they would have been preparing to fight before the Supreme Court. So we probably would have had another $500,000 or so involved in it. So it was good it ended when it did.
Yes, we didn't want it going any further. It was a resounding one. But how did it affect your company? So now you don't have a promotional partner like USA Today, right? And you've gone through this, and you guys paid over $1 million. How did it hurt Diamond Challenge and your games?
Well, the games themselves did pretty well, and they still lived on through the whole thing without having the big promotional sponsor on it, not having the Sporting News name or the USA Today name on it. And the customers realized we were the ones running the games and all that, and they continued to play, and they were happy with it. And we had the feeling that they would continue to, and that we didn't really have to have the big promotional name on it. Our contact at USA Today that we had in the beginning, he was long gone and moved on. And so we didn't really have an opportunity to go back to sell it to anybody else. But we did incur a lot of debt in the doing of it. And it was at that point, we started looking for other buyers for no other reason to be able to pay off the debt that we wound up having. And that's when we found Rob Pythian in Fanball. And he was getting ready to build a network. And so we approached him, and he was interested, and I think he might have had a little bit to do with that also at the time, and so it worked out well, and we wound up selling to a group that was called Fun Technologies, and at the time, Fun Technologies was 49% owned by Liberty Media Corporation, but they kind of ran their own thing. Well, within 9 months of our making the sale and being done, Liberty Media Corporation had taken over the whole thing and had gotten rid of Fun Technology. So then we were back with a major partner again. Now we're with Liberty Media Corporation. Right. I mean, if you remember, they own DirecTV, and so we had these great hopes and aspirations of being able to do things with DirecTV and having things on the television screen and being able to have fantasy games with DirecTV, and Liberty Media Corporation put us in a different division, and so we never got that opportunity. And as it turned out, I think what we figured out that there were some internal things going on in Liberty Media Corporation, and there were some people who wanted to get rid of some other people, and they were looking for a scapegoat to be able to do it. And we actually got put in the division with the guy who was the scapegoat they were trying to get rid of. So when they got the opportunity to shut the whole thing down, and I think they ran it for maybe 6-7 years, is how long we were Liberty Media Corporation employees and all that. and then when they got the opportunity to shut it down, they did. And so that's when myself and John Bryson and Henry Eyrick and a couple other people bought the games back, and that's when you bought your games back from them also, and did what we did to do. But our loyal customers stayed through us through thick and thin through all of it, and
Yeah.
continued to play the games and everything. So
Yeah. Yeah, Liberty Media owned the Atlanta Braves as well. We were just like, "Oh,
yeah,
this is awesome." And they ended up buying us, and so I worked with Charlie, and it was unique because you were still the salary cap transaction fees, and I was at 80% paying, and it was two different games, but it was great. I think we could have really, really survived back then, but Liberty, like you said, had internal problems. At one point, they just said, "We're done." And so
yeah,
then they had to sell off all the games, and they didn't want any of the customers to get hurt. Credit to them. They sold it to me to keep it going that year. Same with you. You were able to
yeah.
keep it going in 2011, but we
Sold
worked
the
together for
commissioner
about.
service. So they sold the commissioner service to RT Sports, so that
Yep,
all the people
yep.
in all the leagues were able to continue to do it. Yeah, it
Yep.
was interesting. I don't know if you remember this, Greg, but at one point in time when you were just getting ready to start doing the high roller games, we sat and talked at the Arizona Fall League,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
and there was a conference there, and we had this plan to be able to work together and do all this. I
Yep,
remember going back and trying to talk Brian into doing it, and Brian said,
yep.
"No, we don't want to do those kind of games. We don't want to do those kind of games." And I thought, "Oh no, this is the future. We need to be doing this." But he didn't want to listen to me. So
Well, I did a podcast on the history of the NFBC because this is our 20th anniversary, and I said I went to the 2003 Arizona Fall League Symposium, or actually 2002 it was, and I thought about doing this because I had just gone to WCUFF. I saw it, and so
yeah,
you, me, and John Zaleski were sitting at Phoenix Stadium. It was a freezing night. I remember that in
yeah,
Arizona. I didn't have a jacket at all, and I said I want to do this, but I said how many teams would I do? And I don't want to do 12 teams because Labor was 12 teams. It was very hard. I wanted a hard one. You said 14. Zaleski said 16. And I said, I went on the plane. I thought about it. And I was like, there's 30 MLB teams. I'm doing 15 team leagues. That's half full.
yeah,
I don't want to agree with either one of these two guys, so I'm going to go right in the middle. It's going to be my own game. And now the 15-team format is just fantastic in the
yeah,
industry. There's so many people that use it and stuff. But no, we go way back. We should have been working together because Krause didn't really believe in my concept either. I think
yeah,
if we had grown together, but my margins were small, and so I'm sure Brian said, "No, we don't want that. Those
yeah,
margins are too small." But
yeah. It is an
uh,
awful lot of work for not making too much money.
it's a
So
lot of work, but now how do we do it? It's volume, 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 and the
yeah,
internet has just been so good. And you landed good, we landed good. We ended up getting back together and working. So
yeah.
talk about the Diamond Challenge because I want to do maybe you and I could even do a regular podcast where we can talk about the salaries and the values. And I want to get you involved, but you still like the Diamond Challenge. You still would play the Diamond Challenge, right?
Oh yeah, I love it, and I've said this in the beginning, and I've continued to say it, and I still believe it to this day, that the guy who wins the Diamond Challenge fantasy baseball game is the smartest and best fantasy baseball player in the world, and the reason for it is he's got 100% control over everything that he's doing. We put the salaries on all the different players, but he has the right to select whatever players he wants to be able to put on his team. He gets to manage his team however he wants to. He gets to make his changes. He gets to drop guys and pick up new guys. He gets to set his lineup every week based on who he's thinking is going to do the best each week and all that kind of stuff. And so at the end of the day, the guy who winds up winning the Diamond Challenge, he's the smartest fantasy baseball player in the world because everybody had the same opportunity to do what he did, but he was able to do it better than everybody else, and that's why he wound up winning.
Yep, it's a very tough game, no doubt about it. So here's what I'm going to do right now, and I'll tweet this out later, but we're going to get Charlie in a 15-team league, all right? He's going to compete against 14 other people, and he'll be involved in the overall for the $30,000 grand prize in the Diamond Challenge Roto, okay?
Oh,
Cost
good.
of
I'm going to
entry.
win some money.
Yeah, you got a chance to win some money. And cost of entry is $400. So we're going to give 10% off, of $40 off to the next 14 people who sign up with the promo code Godfather, all caps. All right. And when we see 14 entries come in with that promo code, we're going to put them in Charlie's league. And then you're going to compete against Charlie for league prizes and overall prizes. And like I said, Charlie and I will do a podcast from time to time to talk about the values, what you should be looking for, how you should spend on pitching versus hitting. I want to have fun with Charlie. He's my good friend in the industry, probably my best friend in the industry, and we've done a lot together. So if you're ready, Charlie, I'm ready to do this with you.
I'm ready. The guys out there shouldn't be intimidated against playing against me. Back in the very beginning when we started the game, we offered to people an opportunity to play against Carol,
Yeah.
and we're working on the male ego of I can beat some girl that's doing fantasy baseball. But the reality of it was it was never really Carol running that team. It was me running that team, but we just put her name on it to get people to play. And I think it was $10, and if you beat me, you got $25 back.
Yeah.
And by the second or third year or so, I found out real quick, and it really hurt my ego an awful lot, that I wasn't exactly the smartest fantasy baseball player in the world.
Yep.
And while I won my share of leagues and have done pretty well over the years and stuff like that, the guys who are playing Diamond Challenge are really sharp and really good guys. Guys like Larry Schechter, who's the only guy who's ever won back-to-back years, and a lot of your best players that are playing your games these days, they played Diamond Challenge for many, many years. Yep. And I think some of that training helped them to be where they are now. But these guys are really sharp. They know what they're doing. They're good on projecting players and knowing the intricacies of the game and all that kind of stuff. So, if I end up above the halfway point, in this 15-team league, if I end up 8th, I'm going to be happy. Because I know these guys out there are pretty sharp, and there's a lot of them out there who would like nothing more than be able to say, I beat the Godfather at his own game. So
absolutely.
That will make it fun, yeah.
Good. So sign up, everyone, and join Charlie. I got to ask you before we go here. We've seen how this industry has grown, Charlie, over the 30-plus years we've been involved. Now we see legalized sports betting and how it's changed the industry. We saw DFS. In fact, we were part of DFS, right?
Yeah.
When it was, what was it called? A Snap Draft or something like
right.
that?
We were the first ones with Snap Draft with MSNBC, with NBC
Correct,
and
right out
Wolf.
there. Unfortunately, we weren't as good as FanDuel and DraftKings, who came after us, and they buried the hell out of us. But
yeah.
What are your thoughts on this whole change of the industry from the pay to play, obviously, and then DFS, and now legalized sports betting? Prop bets are so big.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a place for all of it, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, guys and women for that matter. I mean, the sports industry has always been something that really entertains them, and it adds to their enjoyment of watching games and watching sports. And you remember from the early research that we did with the Fantasy Sports Trade Association that the correlation between guys playing fantasy sports and gambling really wasn't that big. Everybody who played fantasy sports was willing to gamble, but not everybody that was gambling wanted to play fantasy sports. And so we never felt like gambling was taking anything away from us and taking fantasy sports players away. The people who wanted to play the fantasy games were going to continue to do it. In fact, I had people over the years that told me that, like Mike Siegel from New York, that how much he appreciated having these fantasy sports games because he got that same rush and the same thrill of playing in fantasy sports that he did from gambling, and it wound up saving $30,000 to $50,000 a year, but what he was losing in gambling. So so he really enjoyed the opportunity to do it, and I think that's still true today. The people who love playing fantasy sports and they love the challenge of it and the enjoyment, and adds to their entertainment of watching the team, watching Sports Center, and watching the highlights and checking the box scores to see how your guys did the next day. That's never going to change. We've got an audience of 30 million people who love playing fantasy sports. And if anything, I think it just continues to grow because as people play and as people who haven't played before try it and they see how much fun it is and they like it, they continue to play. And there'll always be people who are going to want to gamble and take their shot at doing it. But the relationship between playing a fantasy game and being able to gamble is a lot different. That immediate gratification you get from gambling is wonderful, and we've all enjoyed it the few times we've won. Yep. But, in fantasy sports, that immediate gratification takes a period for you to be able to get it. And I think when you do wind up winning at the end, you feel so much more satisfied for having won your fantasy league because of the time and effort it took for you to be able to do it. So, it's industry's really changed over the time. When the DFS thing came along here a few years ago, more than a few now, I guess. But there were some of us that felt like their end game play here especially with DraftKings and FanDuel, because we were watching what they were doing. We were
Yep.
seeing the money that they were spending. They were losing money at what they were doing, raising big sums of money to get customers and all that. We kept thinking, what are they doing this for? How are they ever going to make any money? Their margins are so thin. Well, some of us had the feeling that their end game was gambling, and that sports
Yep.
gambling was going to become legalized in this country, and that they would have the world's largest sports books and be able to make a lot of money with them. And that's basically what's happened, and that's where DraftKings and FanDuel are today. And I'm sure most of their revenue now is getting generated from gambling. It's not from their daily games.
Right. They never made any money on DFS, that's for
No.
sure, but they sure got a lot of customer lists, and they can
Yeah.
promote now their software for legalized sports betting in those states to all those customers for sure. You know what? The beauty though of fantasy, and this is how it all started in our local leagues, is the camaraderie, the community, and that's where I try to do with the live events. I want guys to meet each other and to get to know each other and to come together and have fun together. That's the beauty of it, and so I think camaraderie and community in fantasy will always separate from betting, sports
Yeah,
betting, for sure.
yeah. I remember over the years, fathers and sons getting together and running a team together. And I'd have a dad call me on the phone and was answering phones and tell me how important it was that this came along. His son he hadn't talked to in 5 years, and they had very little to talk about. They were sharing this team, and now they talked every week, once or twice. And
Yep.
and how wonderful that was for him, and valuable to be able to do it and to help rekindle their relationships and all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
and getting to know other people in the industry. I mean, I remember back in the day, there would be a bunch of CDM guys who would have a league that they would be playing out in Vegas and in your game, and they would all go out and they'd be drafting against each other, but they'd all get together the night before and we'd sit around and talk. And we actually we had a CDM league where we put all these guys in and they all drafted together and played against each other.
Yep.
And it was getting to know all those guys and having fun with them. That really was one of the most important aspects of doing all this is building relationships. It's
Yep.
just so valuable.
Yep. All right. Well, that's what we're going to continue to do here. And like I said, Charlie and I will do a podcast from time to time. Diamond Challenge. Jump in, play it. $30,000 grand prize for the Roto contest, $15,000 for the points contest. Entry fees of $400 and $250, but you can save $40 by going Godfather. Type it in with all caps. All right. Charlie, it was great talking to you. I got to get down to St. Louis. We got to share some beers together at a Cardinals game again.
Yeah, come see your brother and visit me.
I will. I'll do that.
Okay.
How's that? All right. Thanks, Charlie Wiegert, right there. I'll have another podcast next week. All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. See ya.
Thanks, Greg.
You bet, Charlie.